And so I want to jump to section 93 now, because section 93 really deals on this idea of fullness, a fullness of glory, a fullness of power, a fullness of intelligence, a fullness of God, of being able to become like Him. Section 93 tells us why. Now, we don't really know the context, meaning we, like historians and scholars, there's nothing definitive that says this is what was happening and Joseph had this revelation like section 76 does. All we have is this beautiful, beautiful revelation in section 93, a revelation, by the way, that Truman G. Madsen said that section 93 cuts through so many Gordian knots of philosophy on like the nature of sin, how we can be eternal beings and yet still be created, what the purpose and potential of mankind is. One of the beautiful things about section 93 is it gives us a thesis statement. It says in verse 19 and 20, in section 93, the Lord says, I give unto you these sayings, that you may understand and know how to worship, and know what you worship. So I like to call this the revelation on the what, the why, and the how we worship. What do we worship? Well, we worship Christ's example. How do we worship? Well, we worship by growing grace for grace, as this revelation will tell us, like Christ did. Why do we worship this way? It's so that we can receive a fullness and become like God. Going on in verse 19. And know what you worship, that you may come unto the Father in my name, and in due time receive of His fullness. There's that word again. For if you keep my commandments, you shall receive of His fullness, and be glorified in me as I am in the Father. Therefore I say unto you, you shall receive grace for grace. It's really, really beautiful. Section 93 is revolutionary in the idea that it introduces not only our potential to progress into godhood, but it also reveals that Jesus progressed into godhood. It says over and over again in section 93 that Christ did not receive a fullness at first. I mean, it says it 3 times in there. He did not receive a fullness of glory and power and immortality during His mortality, but that He grew into it line upon line. And it's not until after His resurrection that Jesus says, now all power is given me in heaven and on earth. Or in 3 Nephi 11, be perfect even as I now am perfected or have received a fullness. That is a really cool idea that Christ understands growth and progression. Well, what does section 93 teach us about how Christ grew and about how we grew? Well, look at these verses. It says in verse 27, no man receiveth a fullness, there's that word again, unless he keepeth his commandments, God's commandments. Verse 28, he that keepeth his commandments receives light and truth, until he is glorified in truth and knoweth all things. So in other words, we don't get a fullness unless we keep commandments. And as we obey commandments, we get more light and truth. Verse 36, that's God's glory, is that He has progressed and He has gained light and truth. The glory of God is this intelligence or light and truth. And if you look at verse 39, well then how do we lose light and truth? How do we lose the fullness? And that wicked one cometh and taketh away light and truth through disobedience from the children of men. And so God commands Joseph and the church and us to be brought up in light and truth. If you look at this graphic here, think of it almost like an XY axis. On the bottom axis is obedience, and on the top axis is light and truth. Now Jesus, as he obeyed something, he got more light and truth. And as he got that more light and truth, he immediately obeyed the light and truth he received. And as Luke 2:52 says, he increased in wisdom and stature. He did increase and grow line upon line, but his was exponential. Line upon line, that he would obey and get more light and truth. And he would obey that light and truth and get more light and truth. Ours looks a little bit different. This is what our obedience looks like. You know, we obey and then we kind of lose light and truth, and We obey and we get more, and then we struggle to obey that. And ours is a little bit more up and down, a lot more up and down if you're me. But hopefully the trajectory is slowly trending upward. And as we obey, we get more and we grow. That's why Joseph Smith, near the end of his life, by the way, in his King Follett sermon that I'll talk about in a later video, he actually returns to themes of section 93, and he says, quote, "When you climb a ladder, you must begin at the bottom and go on until you learn the last principle. It will be a great while before you have learned the last. It is not all to be comprehended in this world. It's a great thing to learn salvation beyond the grave." Don't let any of us think that we need to be exactly like Jesus in mortality or arrive to a perfection. It's not going to happen. As President Nelson has said, that it is far off. We're not going to be perfected long after the grave, long until the resurrection. But Joseph does continue to say, "Here then is life eternal, to know the only wise and true God. And you have got to learn how to be gods yourselves. To be," and then he's going to return back to section 76, "to be kings and priests to God." Or I would add queens and priestesses. "The same as all gods have done, by going from a small degree to another." And now, notice he's tapping into section 93. "From grace to grace, or from exaltation to exaltation, until you're able to sit in glory and sit enthroned in everlasting power." Now, that able, I want to touch on that again. This is why when Elder Dallin H. Oaks said, the purpose of life is not just to know something, as opposed to the institutions of the world. We are not here just to learn things. Learning it is important, but we have to incorporate it into our being and into our life. We are here to become. It's a challenge to become something, to become people who are able to obey a celestial law and able to sit enthroned in glory.